Hello. So my presentation is basically about a website that was created for a consortial catalog and sort of the hacky experiences of using Drupal to do this. So the site itself is called Gallup, so that's why the presentation's kind of horse-themed. And Gallup stands for Government and Legislative Libraries Online Publication Portal. The French name doesn't exactly fit the horse theme, but it's there as well. And so it's a bilingual site. And it was an initiative of the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, the library there, and so it was basically meant to enable cross-jurisdictional research. So the reference librarians at the legislations would take questions about what other assemblies or whatever other provinces are doing on certain topics, and to search all these individual catalogs is a pain, so they built this system. But so there's a lot of faults, and it was sort of had loftier ambitions that it ever was able to meet, and it's not really essential product for any library involved, and it was never really supported very much, typically only having 2 to 3 people working on it at a time, and rarely any of those people were web developers, with limited contributions from other jurisdictions outside of Ontario. So this leads to a lot of unique challenges. And this presentation will cover sort of theoretical benefits and real challenges. So I thought this presentation would be like other pre-pandemic presentations where I'd sort of plug my laptop in and click through things. So I have links to the site, but you can also just go to those. So I sort of slapped in some slide or screenshots in lieu of clicking around the site. This is sort of a last-minute change, so it's a little bit incomplete, I guess. But this is sort of the site with me logged in, and so you can see there's a little drop down for like Gallup admin, and that was sort of like PHP modules created to make the Drupal site more like a library website. And basically it's just sort of MARC records converted into XML file and using Dublin Core. So you can sort of see a record here. And, And so you sort of have all these MARC fields just sort of converted into DC fields. And so we use like XSLT script to do this, and XQuery as well through MARC-edit and Saxon. So I learned a bit of command line skills to do this, but it really wasn't that complicated because the records weren't changing all that much. We were just sort of getting rid of local fields and slapping it all into a site. And so for actually accuracy's sake, I used to work at the Legislative Assembly. I guess I forgot to update the conference, but I work at McMaster now. And at the time, this project was like one of the things I was working on a lot. But since I've left, I don't think anyone's really picked it up much, because I sort of still have my login and logged in, and not much has changed. And I was the last person to make any changes to the site. But regardless, so now I'm at McMaster. Yeah, anyways. So Gallup right now is sort of on a Drupal 9 site, and these custom modules are built. So the content of the site is mostly just so like government publications. They're all a little bit dry, and people outside of government don't really look at the site ever. But it has like annual reports, news releases, research publications, and for each jurisdiction, they don't all include the same thing. But what the sort of project included was to have these MARC records converted into XML, and then also to download PDFs of the records. So these are all sort of digital files. And unlike university sort of catalogs, the records themselves were mostly created by catalogers with little copy cataloging involved. So this is sort of a unique way of doing things compared to the experience of most libraries now. And from the PDFs, we also OCR'd and uploaded full text to the site. And so for people who don't know, OCRs where you use a robot determines the characters represented in the PDF and attempts to sort of recreate them as words and sentences. And these PDFs aren't really accurate always, but still useful for searching. And so a lot of these legislations have really small libraries. So this site sort of improves on their older catalog systems and provided more stability in some of them, in some cases as well. So some of these library websites would go down, and this would sort of be an alternative. But so there's also sort of complications, and politicians have complained about historic information being online, that it might confuse the public, that they think it's current if they don't read the dates, so they're sort of like asking not to put this information online, but library staff have sort of accepted that, and so the actual legislative libraries aren't like scraped by Google or whatever, but this Gallup site is. And so instead of having the PDFs in the website that I showed earlier, it's just a link to those library websites. So it's not super accessible and causes various issues there, but it is what it is, I guess. And so the basic workflow for this site was to get the MARC records, reformat them with an XSLT script into an XML file, download these PDFs from the 856 field and OCR the PDFs, and then upload them to Drupal. And so this is really sort of a simple thing that we were doing, but it created a lot of technical challenges, mostly because we didn't have like dedicated developers working on this site. So when it was sort of built, it was built for like the regular workflows of uploading a few files at a time, but the initial load was like 200,000 files or 1 million files, and so there's a backlog when I left of like 180,000 files, and to upload them we could only upload like 200 at a time, so the site kind of stagnated just because the PHP wasn't like in our wheelhouse. We couldn't really fix it, so it was just sort of built once and then left. However, I think this catalog sort of provides insights into issues that university libraries are just sort of dealing with passively. So over the course of my career, I've worked in 4 different universities, and they all sort of have these stories of technical services staff just being like cut from either a whole floor of catalogers or just a huge chunk of catalogers, and they're cut down to like 1 or 2 catalogers for the whole university. And now we sort of all rely on importing records from vendors or like pre-cataloged materials, and many of these records are just sort of garbage, and we just kind of accept or try our best to improve them. But finding materials is always kind of a challenge, and there's like all this work being done on deduping records and improving these records. So this Gallup project was sort of the opposite experience, where like every single record was created by catalogers, and they all sort of took their time to make good records. So in the site itself, building this site, it sort of provides this counterpoint, I guess, even though it's kind of just, the site is not very impressive because it's built by like 3 librarians and 1 developer. However, like, it also sort of shows the ease that we can sort of leave MARC behind, that it doesn't really take that much work, and so that we don't need to necessarily be held back by all these things that we're sort of worried about, like sticking with our old sort of standards that's been around forever. It's not really necessary, that it's not that hard to sort of leave behind. And Gallup sort of presented a great opportunity to try things out with low expectations. In university settings, you can sort of see similar work being done in special digital collections where records can be manipulated or done differently than we do with the main library catalog. Using systems like Islandora or Wikidata and Wikibase. And so for Gallup, I had sort of these hopes and ambitions, if I stated the job, to make it sort of more than what it was, but moved on anyway. So, and looking at the OCR files, you can sort of see in this example of the full text that there's just sort of like a sentence and a point, and then just random words, and then another point. And so here we can sort of see the limitations that even though this like full text searchable catalog is sort of like nicer than just having MARC records, these sort of expectations aren't really lived up to in the actual PDFs themselves. And so the way to sort of improve this, I guess like the next sort of iteration of this site would be to focus on the PDFs themselves instead of just downloading a web page or saving a Word document as a PDF, thinking about how we can sort of format the text itself with headers, tags, and other things. And in the Legislative Assembly themselves, they do this in other aspects. The Hansard debates, which are just like recordings of the House, they are structuring those debates so that you can sort of search them, and these are in HTML format. And this year, Springer Nature had this like webinar on text and data mining, and so you can see these sort of like vendors doing this work, but it's generally not like across the board in libraries, and Springer Nature itself is sort of such a closed-off library system, like that access to these journals is not easy, and not everyone sort of wants to like pay money to put their thing in Springer. But that this is sort of work that we should be doing in libraries, in addition to sort of deduping records or improving MARC catalogs. And so this is just sort of something to think about, I guess, as I move into a university library and sort of deal with familiar issues with MARC records. Yeah, and so I can't click around the site, but anyways, that's all for me. That's my presentation. I have it.
Hey Matthew, so we just have a comment here about Anchor Archive Zine Library does a great job using Drupal. A mention. I don't know if that resonates with you or...
Sure. All right.
I had a quick question for you.
Sure.
I think of when you go into emergency, there's sort of like a pain chart that says 0 to 10, smiley face at the end, and unsmiley face to sort of, talk about the pain point or how much pain you're going through. And, with the question of, is MARC really died or not, how did you feel about the the whole conversion overall, all the things that you were doing when you look back at it?
Yeah, I found it pretty useful just to like think about not using MARC. It was an enjoyable experience, doing so much MARC cataloging earlier in my career, that the rules are just sort of there. They're not really helpful. They don't improve the data per se, and that we don't really need it as much as we sort of enforce it. That worrying about vendors making MARC records is maybe not as important as worrying about better vendor records, and that, yeah, working with XML, it was, I don't know, if this is like a better data format than MARC, then it seems like a useful and easy thing to do. So, yeah, I hope that, like, I don't know, I think this April there was sort of a joke email about Terry Reese crying about MARC dying and stuff that sort of inspired the title. Yeah, and I don't know.
Overall, it's okay.
That's it.
You made
Yeah,
it through.
Okay.
Okay.
It was fine.
All right. Congratulations on your recent position at McMaster as well.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, sorry. We still
do have
have
other
we have a
questions.
couple other questions. Anything you would have done differently? Gone with a different CMS?
Yeah, so as far as like other CMSs, I mean, just using like Islandora with Drupal probably would have been easier because that's sort of built for some library tasks, even though it's not the same. So that's something I would have thought about, but I'm not there anymore, so I'm not thinking about it anymore. Other questions about?
Did you explore using the Drupal MARC module? That's probably deprecated.
No, I don't think that was still around, I guess, or I don't know, I didn't find that, so I'm not sure.